Hey guys, welcome back to Iron Game Chalk Talk. I'm Ron McKeefery, and today's guest is Kyrsten Jensen. Kyrsten is a strength coach for many Olympic and professional athletes from around the world. He was the strength coach for the Danish National Elite Sports Institute. He is the author of the Flexible Periodization Method, and that's what we outlined quite a bit in today's episode. There's a ton of great information, so we're going to get right into it. Sit back and enjoy. All right, guys. Hey, welcome back to Iron Game Chalk Talk. I'm here with Kyrsten Jensen. Kyrsten is the author of the Flexible Periodization Method, and it was a book that I recently had picked up and read and thought very highly of, and so I wanted to bring him on the show. And he's up in Ontario, Canada, and he's just going to kind of go over his method with us today. So, Kyrsten, I appreciate you being on the show, man.
Thank you for inviting me, Ron. Pleasure speaking to you.
Tell us, for everybody that doesn't know much about your history, tell us a little bit about how you got into strength and conditioning and what you're doing now.
Yeah, so I'm from Denmark. I grew up in Denmark. I lived the first 37 years in Denmark. I came to Toronto in 2007. Where I essentially started in strength and conditioning was that after high school, I got into studying math and physics for 2 years. And towards the end of that, I thought, I can't really see myself staying in this laboratory for the rest of my adult life. As I had been on that 2-year education, every morning when I came to the campus, so to speak, I looked forward to going back home to train myself. I did gymnastics at the time. So at the very last night where we graduated, I thought, what do you really like to do? I like sports. That was 4 days before the application deadline for university for the next year. So I applied to get into exercise physiology. I came into exercise physiology at the University of Copenhagen, which is a very, very good university with a long history of exercise phys. Second year there, we had track and field, and there was a lot of practice hours. And I was phenomenally slow, to say the least. My first timed 100 meters, 14.28 seconds. That is very, very slow. So I started thinking, what does it take to become a hare if you're a tortoise? And we had a really nice library that included Tudor Bomper's theory and methodology of training, and also some books by, at least in European track and field, he's well known, called Frank Dick. So I read those, and I remember sitting in that library, which was kind of like 2 big living rooms, and feeling, I want to be a strength coach. It just came out of nowhere, right, that I want to be a strength coach. And Denmark is a relatively small country, so pretty quickly I realized I wanted to be the strength coach in the Danish sports system, so the equivalent of Sport Canada over here. I'm not sure what it's called in the States.
Yeah, USFC. Yeah.
Yeah, then the national system. The position didn't exist, however. So while I was still in university, I started in 91, and in 93 a friend of mine asked me if I wanted to be the strength coach of a local triathlon team. And that little team, they had about 5 triathletes that were world class. So my very first strength coaching job, I got to work with world class triathletes. Yeah. There's some advantages of being from a small country where there were not that many strength coaches at the time. It's 20 years ago, literally.
Sure.
And in 95, I started working for the Danish national badminton team, which is also world-class. Badminton is really big in Europe and in Asia. 2 years after that, I got into national level volleyball. 2 years after that, in 99, I started working with international level figure skating. The trainer of those, she was one of the top persons in the Danish sports system. And through a combination of very lucky circumstances and probably me, doing my job literally, so people viewed me with respect. A month after I graduated, I became the first full-time strength coach for the Danish sports system. That was in the end of 1999.
Wow.
And I worked for them until 2007, where I moved here. It was an extremely fortunate position because I was hired to do individualized strength training programs. So it's kind of the start of the book that we're talking about. Right. They had really bad experiences with hiring contractors to do team-based programs with no follow-up. So it was she came in as a new CEO, kind of head of sports, and so she started some new ways of working, and that was one of it. So at any point in time, I was responsible for creating individualized programs for about 20 to 25 athletes. And that was a full-time position. Right. So I had a lot of time designing the programs really carefully, also time learning. So a very, very fortunate first full-time job, I would say.
No question. You know, one of the things when I came across your book, and you know, it's not atypical in our environment. And this is such an important message to our viewers. Is I looked initially at your bio and looked at the book, and I saw badminton, I saw triathlon, I saw gymnastics, and I'm sitting here going, as a football strength coach, what in the world would I possibly get out of Karsten? And you know, and I almost skipped past the book. I'll be honest with you. I really almost just kind of said, you know what, that's not for me. And I didn't do it. And I read the book, and I'm so glad I did, because, you know, what you mentioned is you worked with a lot of sports that required individualized training. A lot of athletes that required individualized training.
Yeah.
And as a football strength coach, you know, or any team-based strength coach, we try to make our programs as individualized as we can. You know?
Yeah, yeah.
And so there were some great concepts in the book. Talk a little bit about how you got to the flexible periodization method, you know, how you went through, you know, I'm sure you followed the same sequence that a lot of strength coaches follow. You went linear, then nonlinear, then undulating, and kind of talk a little bit about the different types of periodization methods that you tried and what led to the flexible periodization method.
Yeah, so the first thing I learned about was Bombas methods, and the first programs I made in the early to mid 90s were based on Bombas methods. Now it's a long time ago, but I remember that one of the things that I found was difficult in using those methods is that they required long, uninterrupted preparation periods. That's essentially what was laid out in those books.
Sure.
And particularly when I started working in the Danish sports system, also to some extent the figure skaters, they really did not have those types of preparation periods. So I needed a more flexible system where you could actually work with shorter preparation periods. That was a big one there. Mm-hmm. Later on, about 2000, I learned about nonlinear periodization through the works of Fleck and Kramer.
Yep.
I used that for a while with tennis players also. But it was what I found was difficult with that was that, for example, is that valid for all the exercises? What about rotator cuff exercises? You still have a maximal strength day for the rotator cuff exercises. What if someone does not have the training age to do maximal strength work? What if you are a power lifter who probably would not, or an Olympic weightlifter who would not be satisfied with doing maximal strength only once a week? So again, I felt I learned something from it, but I also felt there were limitations to it. I really see the way when I teach the flexible periodization method, what I say is I wanted a system that it's kind of like a console of a DJ, where all the buttons are the acute program variables. And I want a system where I could take anyone and adjust it any way I want it to get the music, so to speak, to sound exactly right, literally with no limitations.
That's a good analogy, yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of the thought process.
So talk a little bit more about the flexible periodization method. What exactly is it? And, you know, you have 7 training blocks. You know, talk a little bit about the 7 training blocks.
Yeah, so it's called the flexible periodization method first and foremost because there are 2 levels of flexibility. The first level is how you combine those blocks to create a macro cycle. Each of I can give you the target training adaptations in each of those blocks in just a second.
Sure.
Each block is designed to be used for a week or more. So essentially, it's a 1-week training template that you then can repeat. And again, when I teach it, I compare it to putting beats on a string. So you begin with like red, yellow, blue, green, and you can decide which color to begin with and how many of them to put in sequence, and then which color you want to continue with. Now, you know, on the beats you can go completely random, whatever you want. In this case, there are rules for which ones you should begin with.
Right.
Yeah. When you have then put that sequence together, you start looking into each block, and if you compare 2 athletes who may have the same sequence of blocks, looking into each block, they do not necessarily do the same program. So when you look into each block, there's also flexibility with any of the acute program variables, for example, exercises, for example, volume. Training methods generally will be kind of in the same ballpark because the training methods are controlled, so to speak, by the target training adaptations.
Sure, sure.
Yeah, I would tend to think, without making it, try to keep it relatively short, that it's based on a lot of the standard textbooks that I feel I put together in a slightly more comprehensive way, and part of the book will also explain correlations to our current terminology. So the first block has the acronym of ISS, indicating that the target training adaptations is individual weak links, that's the I, stability of tonic stabilizer muscles, endurance of tonic stabilizer muscles, and structural strength, as per the definition in super training. Those three target training adaptations, as far as strength and plyometrics, are trained together with the aerobic energy system.
Right.
That's a whole second story why it's tied together the way it is. I don't know. I can give you that after. I can move on to the next block. The next block has the acronym of SIS, standing for structural strength, individual weak links, and endurance of stabilizer muscles. So it's the same goals, but a different priority, emphasizing that structural strength, emphasizing that part of it, which is tendon strength, requires higher intensity.
Yep.
As preparation for the maximal strength block that comes after that. That in general is trained together with the anaerobic lactic system, so the glycolytic system, for slightly more intense interval training. And those two together is in what in other systems would be termed base training or general training.
Yep.
That terminology I don't like, because it doesn't really tell you what's going on. After you kind of say, okay, let's do general training, you have to think about what is it really that we're seeking here in terms of physiological training adaptations. So that's why I went for the terminology that's there.
Yeah.
The third block is the maximal strength block. It's called skill and strength and primal patterns, referring to that now strength is viewed as a motor skill, something I learned from Paolo Tazzolini, which totally made sense with everything I learned about strength and what a skill is. Primal patterns is a trademark terminology from Paul Chek, holistic health practitioner from California.
Yep.
Which I found to be a very effective way of structuring our normal multi-joint exercises. I have quite a bit of my continuing education from him, so that's why that terminology was familiar to me.
And primal patterns, he's talking about squatting, lunging, all the different yeah, he does some. He breaks that down very nicely.
He does. That is tied together with training the ATP-CP system. Yep. So shorter, even more intense sets.
Sure.
So looking at the next block is a maximal power block, and that's what in some systems are called a transmutation or conversion. So that's a block an athlete would use if they compete in a sport where the duration of the competitive event is 20 seconds or less. Literally, so it's a 100-meter sprinter, Olympic weightlifter,
right?
Throwers in track and field. This is very much based on Bomba's work. So it's not something I pulled out of the air.
Right, right.
The second conversion block would be used by athlete essentially in any other sport. So that could theoretically have been broken down more. But that is for a sport-specific combination of speed, power, and endurance. So that would include football, for example.
Right.
For a plan for football using this system would go from the strength block to the SCP block and not use the maximal power block.
I got
so
you.
that would be a second type of conversion block. And after that would be a pre-competition and competition block, and then an active rest block towards the end.
So you have these 7 blocks that you're able to choose from based on the athlete, and then even within that athlete, where you've identified some attributes that they need to improve upon, and that's always the tough part from a football standpoint. Is when asked, what do you want to improve? Strength, speed, power, balance, coordinate. The answer is always yes to all of them. I want to improve all of them. Yeah. And so what's nice about this system is the ability to go between and spend various levels of emphasis on each block, and then even within the within the quadrennial plan of having an athlete as a freshman to a senior, you're able to spend a little bit more time maybe early on in that stability and that structure blocks, and then progressing more to the speed and power blocks throughout.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Now you mentioned
I have two comments.
Sure,
two comments on that. So part 3 of the book talks about how to put the blocks together, and there's a science-based table, science and empirically based table for how to use those blocks in different proportions as the training age increase in relation to the quadrennial plan that you talk about there.
Right.
And it's exactly like you would say the first year you would spend more time on the stability training, and then that time will be gradually smaller in proportion as the athlete develops in training age. The second thing about coaches wanting to do all of it is that part of the goal setting process is to identify what I just call type 1 goals. That's essentially what the coach or the athlete will look at and want to see when they evaluate their own competition. So that's the ability to practice and compete. And it falls in 7 different categories. One of them is to improve peak performance, for example. So in football, it could be someone simply to sprint faster.
Yep.
Another one is to repeat peak performance. So that would be ability to keep sprinting fast throughout a game. Another one would be to be able to repeat peak performance in repeated games. So I'm not sure about the structure in football. So if you compete several days in a row, being able to perform well also on the second day and the third day. One of the things that are extremely important from a very practical point of view is that whatever you want to improve, you need to be enough training time so you can actually train enough on that particular parameter so you are improving it.
Right.
If you try to improve too much, you will spread yourself thin. So it's one of the biggest fundamental common sense lessons in program design is that when you identify the goals, you want to make sure that you limit the goals to the true weak links, literally, in order to get enough time on that weak link.
And that's an important point because, as professionals, we have an obligation to make sure that there's the connection between the athlete, the coach, and the strength coach in identifying what exactly are the most pressing goals and how to address them. And sometimes there's that disconnect between the athlete, well, I think I'm fast. Well, you're not really fast compared to maybe this guy, that we need to, that you're competing with. And so that's an important step in the goal setting process, no doubt.
Extremely important step. And it's extremely important to try and involve the athlete. It's something that it's always been done in the Danish sports system. And I typically had meetings with the coach and the athlete before the start of each new macro cycle. We would have a 1-hour meeting talking about what was the type 1 goal. And sometimes the goal and the coach and the athlete would have the same view on it. Sometimes they would have different views on it.
Sure.
And I worked with athletes ranging from 15 years of age, or even being like almost totally green, to being towards the end of their career in the early 30s. And clearly, for a 15-year-old athlete, it's the coach who decides what the goal is, more or less. On the other hand, the coaches were good enough and let the more mature athletes more or less decide what they should be working on.
Well, and again, with your block system, as you mentioned, as you demonstrate more stability and structure, you're going to spend less time in those blocks, and so it's going to be, it's back on the athlete. Well, demonstrate to me that you have this, and we can progress faster. And I think that's something that, especially in the college setting, you get that freshman in, maybe they have a ton of talent, performance talent. But then they get in the weight room and maybe they don't bench as much or squat as much or power clean as much, but they're looking at the guy next to him and he's got 300 pounds on the bar and he's repping it like it's easy and he wants to stay up with them. So technique and stability and structure and all those things go out the window, and that's an important step as coaches. We need to step in and say, no, you know, we don't want to limit you down the line because we've skipped these steps.
Yeah, I totally agree. I have a couple of comments in that regard. I think because I worked with, I remember particularly a couple of doubles players in badminton. They were world champions in 2003. And one of them, he was good because he was very good technically. The only goal for him in strength and conditioning was not to get injured.
Yeah.
What I learned from that particular athlete is that in some cases it's not about the strength, it's about the performance. So one of the quotes in the book is that no one wants to sit in the locker room and brag about the new one-arm squat after they lost.
Yeah.
And so it should not be too much. You absolutely need to be very, very strong to play football, but it not at the expense of football performance, because then it's of no use.
I agree.
The second thing is that sometimes stability is viewed as something that's done with like pink dumbbells and maybe on Swiss balls. And it's something you do either if you have been injured or something you're doing not to get injured. And it's somewhat boring, something you have to get it over and done with so you can get to do the real stuff, so to speak.
Correct.
I came across a quote from Vasily Alexeyev. You know who it is? Yeah.
No, I'm not too familiar.
Russian weightlifter from the 70s, 80 world records in the 70s.
Okay, yeah.
He was famous for training in extraordinary ways, and one of his quotes, his training methods goes along. Sif interviewed him, and it says something along the lines of Alexeyev would perform multiple exercises in a row for 2 to 3 minutes straight. The load would be low, but every muscle would be worked through the sustained effort. Then I thought about what muscles are under continuous tension for 2 to 3 minutes straight. If you do, for example, power snatches, overhead squats, split jerks, deadlifts, bent over rows.
Right.
It's the core.
Yeah.
So what Alexeyev essentially did there, he did core stability training, but probably with 300 pounds on the bar, working for like 3 minutes straight. That was an important realization for me, that stability training is not only something you do if you want to avoid getting injured. It has its place if you want to be the strongest person walking this planet.
That's a great
which
point.
Alexeyev was in the 70s.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
If the viewers, a lot of the ones that have seen me speak have always mentioned, heard me talk about having systems and always talk about being principle-based and then philosophy-based, or rather than philosophy-based. What are, in the book you go over several first, I'm going to do this, these are going to be things that are definitely in my plan. Go through those first. Yeah.
It ties into the definition of periodization. I thought for a very long time that periodization was a sport training concept and essentially developed from the start by Tudor Bomber, until it occurred to me to look it up in the dictionary. Mm-hmm. And it simply means a division into periods. So if you tie that into the difference in various textbooks, the definition that I work with these days is that periodization is a division of a longer training cycle into shorter periods with different goals, structures, and content of the training program. These goals, structures, and content of the training program are sequenced, with emphasis on sequencing, in such a way that selected physical parameters are optimized at a predetermined date or dates, right. Meaning the days of the competition. So when we're looking at different periods, we also start talking about something that happens first and something that comes on later. And one of the firsts is to emphasize weak links before the function of the entire kinetic chain. I essentially learned that through the works of Louis Simmons and his conjugate sequence system. And it makes a lot of sense. If you try to perform a multi-joint movement with a single weak link, that single weak link will hold you back. You can attach some more technical terms like intra and intermuscular coordination to it, but it really is a fundamental idea of there are two ways of improving, let's just say sprinting or tackling. You can improve the way the chain works together, or you can improve the function of the individual links.
Right.
And you'll focus on the individual links first, and then improve the function of the entire kinetic chain.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and then the twist on that is you can work on an individual link using a single joint exercise, or you can also work on an individual link using a modified multi-joint exercise. The first time that was really hammered home was in one of Tazzolini's book called Power to the People, where he talks about different but the same. So a very, very well-known example is your close grip bench presses to emphasize the triceps muscles.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And you go on to talk about tonic muscles versus primary movers.
Yeah. So another one which I learned first in the Czech programs is stability, endurance of the tonic stabilizer muscles before strength of the prime movers, and the physiology behind why, what stability is and why it's important before you want to be strong and explosive is a definition, at least one definition of stability, is that it's a optimal instantaneous axis of rotation at any plane at any joint in time, regardless of extrinsic or intrinsic forces.
Right.
If that is not met, the joint will experience excessive compression, torsion, or shear, which will result over time in wear and tear to the supportive structures like joint capsules, ligaments, bone surfaces, tendons, etc. That can create sometimes a subclinical stimulation of pain receptors, which in turn will inhibit the motor neurons feeding those muscles. So if you are unstable, you can go into a gray zone where you're literally trained with inhibition.
That's right. That's right.
I emphasize that it's the tonic stabilizers, which are the smaller muscles closer to the joint, because all muscles, as Sif also points out, can have a stabilizing function, even though it is a big agonist in general. So one of the differences that for me makes it clear is that some muscles have a shorter lever arm in relation to the axis of rotation, which kind of indicates that they're not designed to move the joint. They're more designed to compress the joint. So those are, for example, the multifidi on the back, the teres minor of the shoulder, the gluteus minimus of the hip, gluteus medius of the hip.
Sure, sure. You go on structural strength versus functional strength?
It's originally based on that very, very fundamental study I'm sure most are familiar with, that if you take a beginner and take them through a strength training program after 8 weeks, they will be stronger. The reason they are stronger, according to the researchers, is because they can activate the muscles to a higher degree that tendons have not gotten stronger. So this is the way it's laid out by Bomba. For example, you have a situation where your muscles can pull harder on your tendons, but your tendons have not gotten stronger. That's the reason why you at least definitely for the beginner would want to emphasize structural strength before maximal strength.
Right.
And you can also say how much, because the maximal strength training will also give structural strength because the tendons respond to high load. So when you are beyond the first stage, you do not have to spend as much time in that phase. A little bit depending on which sport you're in as well.
Right. And the last one you had was emphasizing max strength before specific combinations of speed, power for sport. And go ahead and touch on that one.
Yeah. So what that refers to there's a really good reference in the book from the Australian Institute of Sports that explains that the greater the maximal strength in relation to your sport-specific movements, the more quality repetitions can be performed before the onset of fatigue. That is one component of it. Another really good component of it, which actually made me go down the wrong line with my master thesis originally, but I think it's a good point for. It's a computer simulation study done by Dutch researchers, and they tried to make a computer model of a volleyball player. Okay. So they put in things like maximal strength, rate of force development, and they measured this person's jump height in a computer simulation. Then they changed the strength parameters, only maximal strength, but not coordination, not the way the muscles turned on and turned off. And what they found was that with increased strength parameters only, this person would actually had a diminished jump height. Then in the third round of simulations, they matched the coordination so the way the muscles turned on and turned off, to the increased strength levels, and then the jump height was increased beyond baseline levels. So that you can say that's an example that it kind of points to the need for improving both the neural activation, so the ability to even fire the muscle fibers, and then followed by the neural control, which is to fire them in the right sequence given the movement task.
No question.
For example, when squatting, my master thesis ended up being a literature review of squatting and plyometrics to improve vertical jump.
Yep.
For example, while squatting definitely will improve hip extension strength and torque, you typically do not include hip extension in coordination with plantar flexion torque, and not at the speed that are needed in jump. So one of the conclusions that I learned there was that strength training will improve neural activation, so the ability to activate a higher number of muscle fibers at a higher rate, but not neural control for a more powerful task. So not the actual way that you fire those muscle fibers for jumping, for throwing, for punching, for tackling, for any of the sport-specific movement. And that's why you need the conversion or the transmutation phases.
No, yeah, absolutely. You talk a little bit about physical capacity before, sport-specific training as well in those first.
Yeah, that relates to the relationship between strength and conditioning and sport-specific training. So since the fundamental purpose of strength and conditioning is to improve an athlete's ability to do the sport-specific training, generally speaking, it would make sense to emphasize the strength and conditioning before the sport-specific training.
Absolutely.
I'm well aware that sometimes, in most cases, it happens more or less at the same time. Sometimes with almost an equal emphasis throughout a macrocycle, sometimes with a stronger emphasis on strength and conditioning in the beginning, and less emphasis on tactical skills, and then that pattern is reversed as the macrocycle moves on. I would say one of the very interesting blurry points, so to speak, in that regard is that it's very common in Danish team sports to use the sport-specific practice as energy systems conditioning. So one of my mentors was a national volleyball coach, and his players never ran, but he would do very, very competitive drills with them as far as volleyball practice, creating winners and losers, generally create the same type of stress as in competition. Whenever they got to the test centers to have their VO2 max tested on the treadmills, they blew the roof out.
Really?
Yeah. And the guy who taught me most of what I know on energy systems is a doctor in soccer. And he, for a 4-year period, he was a strength and conditioning coach in Juventus in Italy before he went back to the University of Copenhagen to become a professor.
Wow.
Yeah, one of his main principles, when we're talking about principle, is to do as much of the energy systems training with the ball as possible. We're talking European soccer here in order to develop the technical skills as well. So part of when we get to the later blocks of the flexible periodization method is it presents the idea that part of the sport-specific practice becomes sport-specific practice with an energy systems component, simply in order to create more bang for the buck, so to speak.
Sure. Sure.
Important consideration if there's a lack of training time in general.
Well, what's great about these, all these first, is that it lends itself very easily to preparing the athlete in a proper sequencing so that they do not injure themselves when they get to more advanced training.
Absolutely.
And that's such an important lesson, an important point, because too many times you feel so rushed as strength coaches because you only got maybe 8 weeks here and maybe 8 weeks there, and then it's back into competitive type environments that you want to get as much bang for your buck as quickly as you can, and you bypass some of those first, and again, I thought this was a very good way of laying that out. Now, likewise, as strength coaches, I think sometimes we get so caught up in like this time of year, it's combine time. So you see a lot of different types of training going on. You're maybe doing a little bit more reading. You're doing this, that, and the other, and you just want to throw a bunch of things in your program because that looks cool. You have 9 steps, and just briefly kind of mention your 9 steps that you go through in developing your program, because I think it's important as coaches that we have a blueprint and something that keeps us dialed into our programming and keeps us from just grabbing on to whatever the latest fad is.
Yeah. Yes. So the first two steps. The first step is about the goal setting process. So that's identifying the type 1 goal. The second step is the assessment, and the third step is identifying the specific physical goals that I seek. There's a specific target training adaptations, and that's what's termed the type 2 goals, and that's based on some very interesting questions that I learned from Charles Daly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
he'd
be familiar to most strength coaches.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very, very, very common sense approach that essentially tries to look at what is the goal performance and how are the test results in relation to the goal performance and where are the weak links, and then subsequently you focus on the weak links. The saying that I sometimes use is that you don't want to create a great program with the wrong goals, meaning you want to work on what the athlete really needs. So even though that there is sprinting in football, if someone is already the fastest sprinter and always can outrun the defense, there's no reason to do a whole lot of sprint training. Right. You just want to make sure this person maintain whatever he has already. On the other hand, let's say this person is so fast he always gets hamstring injuries. Maybe it's time to look at something structural around the pelvis or wherever that hamstring injury is coming from. That's part of that. And where I first saw that was two young female athletes, one judo athlete and one badminton athlete, who was training as hard as anyone in the gym, and they were serious. They were eating healthy. They did not make progress. So you're quickly realizing there as a strength coach that sometimes it's not about what's going on in the gym. It's about what's going on, outside the gym. It may be hormonal imbalances. It may be the mental component of it. And for me as a strength coach, I want the athlete to work on what's going to benefit them in competition. Like I say, I cannot brag about the 1 RM squat if they lose in competition.
Right.
Then the coaches are not going to be happy with me.
Yeah,
they want athletes who perform. They don't care about the gym performances.
That's right.
Not the coaches I work with anyway. And so that's why I really want to focus on what's the need. And sometimes it's not even the training program.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
After that, after the fourth step is identifying the sequence of blocks. Then the exercises with the tempos. Then it's the specific applications of progressive overload, what I call method variations.
Right.
Then it's the total training volume and number of repetitions per week. And at the very last, it's the number of sets and number of interval repetitions to make sure that the method variation matches the total volume. Because, for example, maximal strength, to give that an example, you sometimes say 1 to 5 or 1 to 6 repetitions per set.
Right.
Which is why at some point in time I felt that giving a recommendation as far as the number of sets was relatively meaningless, because 3 sets of 5, that's a good workout. 3 sets of 1 is probably not enough. So it's more about, and this was also inspired of some of Tartolini's work, it's more about hitting a certain number of repetitions in a session and per week with a certain intensity. And depending on the length of your set, 5 rep sets or 1 rep sets, that determine how many sets you're doing.
Sure, sure.
And I use the same approach with intervals. And the last thing about program creation is to write the program. So I've always been in a situation where I would have needed to give the athlete a program. So that's always been a big step for me. I know that many of your viewers may not work that way, but so they may feel different about that step. But that's the last step, and the last step is instructing and supervising the program,
right,
and then following up with training logs.
Yeah, and I would say that most coaches they write out their programs as well, and it's definitely an important step. And I think what this does though is it's providing a framework for you to keep yourself dialed in, and so you don't get, because it's easy as strength coaches to get distracted, and so when you're writing programs, because there is so much. It is, you start talking about all those type 1 and type 2 goals, and it's easy to get, they need to, and you got to center yourself a little bit, and I think that this, these 9 steps are, basically your typical needs analysis and kind of going into your basic, your programming. And I really liked how you laid it out in the book. And then in the book, you have a whole section of how you take each one of these blocks and how you would program and within each one of these blocks. And that's way beyond what we have time here to do today. But it is a very well thought out programming, and I would encourage people to take a look at it. One last question, kind of before we let you go. Taking a football, now I like to do this quite a bit. You don't have a whole lot of experience with football. I like that fresh perspective. In this time of year, we got a winter training block. You got about 8 to 9 weeks before spring ball starts, which spring ball is kind of like a mini season. You're doing 3 weeks of practicing, 4 weeks of practicing, and then you play a scrimmage, and then you go back to training, and then you get into the season, and the year is really divided by kind of an 8-week block, kind of a competition block, 4-week competition block, and then you're back to some rest and recovery, and then another 8-week block, essentially.
Of training?
Yeah, of training. So within that 8-week block, what types of, how would you kind of lay that out, just, off the top of your head? How would you lay that out from a team standpoint? And then,
so they want to completely peak in the first 8-week block?
They don't have to completely peak, but they need to be prepared because they are going to go play a game. Now they're not going to play 12 games.
No,
But they need to be, and they are going to go through practice, which that doesn't change. Those demands are still the same.
Yeah. How fit are the athletes when they begin?
They're pretty fit. Typically, they've trained for 3 to 4 years in high school, and most of them are either sophomore, juniors, that have gone through at least an in-season training program prior to that.
Yeah. So there would be so let's say they're really fit, and there would be a strong emphasis on performance. Not a complete peak, though. I really use a lot the Warner Bombers concept of peaking index of 1 to 5. It's very, very helpful in general. But one way would be to use 2 weeks of the first block, the ISS, 2 weeks of the SIS, 2 weeks of the SSP, and 2 weeks of the SEP. When you do it like that, you would want to ensure a great overlap between each of the blocks. Okay. So there's stability training in the 2 first blocks, so you get some stability training in the first 4 weeks. Then in the last 4 weeks, stability training will still be there, but at a very low emphasis. There will be not that much strength in the first 2 weeks, but there will be strength present in the program in the last 6 weeks. There can be jumping. We haven't talked a lot about plyometrics. There can be plyometrics in any of the blocks, with gradually increasing emphasis throughout the blocks. The aerobic system for football, I would use intervals, so which means that there can also be a strong speed component throughout those 8 weeks.
Okay.
And in the last 2 weeks, the interval work, for example, is mostly geared based on the competition, with the purpose of making the competition, the training harder than the competition.
Right.
Also than targeting a particular energy system. That would be one approach. Another approach would be let the first 8 weeks be a little bit more of a base training, and maybe focus 4 weeks in the ISS block and 4 weeks in the SIS block. Again, there will still be both plyometrics and speed work in those 2 blocks. In the SIS block, you can go as high as 95% of the 1RM to emphasize the structural strength.
Right.
The athletes may not be at the same peaking index at the first block, but they would, you would have a decreased likelihood of injuries
Right.
throughout. So there'll be a couple of different ways of going about that.
And again, just kind of to reiterate to some of the viewers, the ISS and the SIS, you're talking about training stability and structure under load.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's not. It goes back to what you made the comment you mentioned earlier, where it's not physio balls and pink dumbbells. It's actual training.
Yeah,
that's an important note there.
Yeah.
Last thing here. What I was impressed by reading the book and talking to you is how many well-referenced points you're firing off right off the top of your head. Bompa and Sif and Tetzolini and the whole deal. I mean, you've really put your time, your homework into reading these guys, truly understanding their concepts, and then asking. You mentioned this in the book. Every book you would ask yourself kind of questions about their training, and those questions led to kind of formulating your philosophy, your method. Talk a little bit about your continuing education plan. How do you I'll tell you, it's I've read your book most recently, and then I read Triphasic Training by Cal Dietz recently, and those books back to back. I'm sitting here going, man, I need something that's outside of strength just to kind of clear my head a little bit.
Yeah,
because they're technical reads. Bompa and Sif, and those are technical reads. You seem to enjoy that and have a knack for being able to pull out very complex and make it a little bit simple.
Yeah. So one of the best tips that I give to all the trainers I teach, I learned from Paul Chek, who talked about how he started his career as a trainer. He was something he tells about in the seminar. So he mentions that he was a very good triathlete at Fort Bragg, and he got free time to train if you train the other triathletes at Fort Bragg so they could beat the other forts. And so the way he learned was that he would have someone come in with an issue, and then he had to fix the issue. So he talks about how he would sit and read at the toilet in order to figure out how to fix the issue. Point being is that in my viewpoint, what it absolutely boils down to for strength coaches is ability to create, instruct, and supervise training programs. So I recommend that we are very aware of the questions we can't answer in the different steps of those processes. So when you create a program or instruct, where do you experience questions? Where do you experience issues? And then you search out workshops, seminars, continuing education, and books that teach you about that. And that way, you know that when you read a book, it's because you're going to use it in a month or next week. Not just because you're reading and you're not really sure if you're ever going to use it. And it's really the same philosophy as far as creating the program, in the sense that we also, in our continuing education, we focus on our weak links. So if I do phenomenal stretching programs, why would I take another stretching workshop if my strength program sucks? Right? That makes it, and that's how I figure out my next book or my next workshop to read.
That's a great point. It's not just about the knowledge; it's the practical application of the knowledge. Is when
Absolutely.
you truly learn and truly retain information, and that's evident in everything that you do. Karsten, I truly appreciate you coming on, man. I've really enjoyed this. I enjoyed reading the book. I know you have yes2strength.com, www.yes2strength.com.
Absolutely.
And then we're going to link up the book in the show notes here. But what else do you have going on right now? What are some of the other things? This is kind of your opportunity to plug anything you got going on.
Yes, now mentioning yes2strength.com, we have a free e-zine. It's called No Gimmicks e-zine, which is a bi-monthly articles related to periodization and different aspects of those 9 steps.
Sure.
And it's a way that it's for strength coaches and trainers, and we really would like to stay in touch with as many trainers as possible through that e-zine. Then we'll also keep trainers up to date with what we're working on. Right now, I'm working on a periodization book for the Danish sports system for their coaches. So that's not strength coaches. So that's for the periodization for the triathlon coach.
Right.
So that's teaching them how to do strength programs. I'm working on a book called Beyond Functional Training, which focuses on the science-based principles for exercise transfer. So I never liked the term functional training, and it's just gotten worse and worse. Because functional is really what works, right? So the only thing that matters for any exercise is that it will help the athlete in the long or short term improve their ability to practice or compete. Doesn't matter what we call it. It matters if it transfers. So really, all training should be functional, which means that it doesn't make sense to have a separate term, functional training.
That's a great point, too.
So those are some key things that I'm working on right now.
Well, Kyrsten, I know, again, I appreciate you coming on the show. I know everybody got a lot out of this, and we'll make sure we put your contact information and everything in the show notes as well, if anybody have any questions for you.
Absolutely.
But we appreciate you coming on Iron Game Chalk Talk, buddy. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. My pleasure.
Take care. Okay, so a couple quick announcements before we let you go. First, we'll make sure to link all of Kyrsten's information, the stuff that we mentioned within the episode, down below in the show notes, whether it's at yestostrength.com or being able to purchase his book, The Flexible Periodization Method. And we'll make sure we have all that stuff and make it easy for you guys to get to. On my end, you know, if you have not gone to my website, it's ronmckeefery.com, and just checked out the information there. Join the mailing list. If you join the mailing list, you get the free video, Compete to Conquer, just a bunch of finishers. And also, all my social media information is there on the right-hand side as well. I'd love to hear back any comments or suggestions you have for the show via the social media there. So look forward to connecting with you, and we'll talk to you later.